I spent 3 decades living in shame, believing I was nothing without him. That night, after he screamed, "You won't even have a place to cry," I knew it was time. The secret? My ticket out was already paid for. I simply disappeared. But what my face did on the news 3 weeks later shut him up for good. But before we keep going, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I love seeing how far our stories reach. And hey, don't forget to drop a like and hit that subscribe button. It really helps out a lot. My name is Diana, I'm 52 years old, and Gregory is my husband. We were married for 30 years, and I'm telling you this now because the silence nearly killed me. The final argument, the one that broke the last splinter of my spirit, started over our wedding anniversary. He forgot it. Again. But forgetting the date wasn't the point. The point was the absolute lack of respect, the constant low-level hum of contempt that was the soundtrack to my life. When I tried to bring it up, not even arguing, just mentioning the date, it escalated, as it always did. He didn't yell about the anniversary. He yelled about money. He always yelled about money. You have no access, Diana. You have nothing in your name. If you ever try to leave, you will be begging on the streets. You'll have nothing without me. That line, "You'll have nothing without me," was his mantra. It was the iron bar that locked my cage. He controlled every single cent, leaving me without credit cards or any independent access to our accounts. The money was his, and I was, in his sickening words, a dependent asset. But as his face turned red and the veins popped in my neck, the truth of his words ceased to frighten me. Instead, they crystallized a plan I had been meticulously building for 6 months, not out of rage, but out of a fierce, desperate instinct for survival. The first step had been the riskiest, the one that tasted like forbidden freedom: selling the sapphire brooch. My grandmother, Evelyn, gave it to me when I was 20. Gregory didn't even know it existed. It was locked away in a separate safe deposit box that he, in his arrogance, assumed contained only old photos. I recount the sheer, paralyzing tension of driving 3 hours away to a reputable antique store in Riverwood. I remember the white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel, inventing ridiculous excuses for Gregory on the phone. "I'm trying a new specialty grocery store network," I told him, trying to keep the quiver out of my voice. The woman at the antique shop, a kind soul named Mrs. Henderson, didn't ask questions, thank goodness. She just handed me a thick wad of bills. It was a life-changing amount, a tangible piece of my past traded for a future. The sensation of holding that cash, crisp and real, was more electrifying than any touch Gregory had given me in 2 decades. It was the only proof of my value, my secret fund for freedom. The cash was now my biggest vulnerability and my greatest strength. It was too much to risk keeping it in a regular spot. So, I wrapped it tightly in plastic, placed it inside a sturdy Ziploc bag, and buried it deep inside a large tin of flour in the back of the kitchen cupboard. Gregory would never, ever go near the flour. He considered the kitchen beneath him. As I held the thought of that money, that literal pot of gold hidden in plain sight, I realized the next problem was even bigger: finding a safe place. It had to be completely off the grid, without a digital trail leading back to Gregory. The apartment in another city, let's call it City B, had to be my anchor, my absolute fortress. But renting it demanded a disguise far more elaborate than any theater performance I had put on for Gregory over the years. This time, I was playing the lead role in my own escape. I was holding the cash, but where to hide? I knew I had to be smart. Finding the right place required anonymity, and I had already chosen my new identity. The biggest problem now was the address. It was far away, and I needed to be absolutely sure that the apartment was secure. I had to pay 6 months in advance, cash only. Everything depended on that cash in the flour tin. I closed my eyes and whispered the name of my new alias, a name I hadn't used in 30 years. Diana Miller. The brooch of sapphire was gone, replaced by the weight of the cash in the flour tin. That money was my silence, my secret strength. I continued the elaborate routine of driving out to Riverwood occasionally, pretending to be searching for a specific item, just to maintain the illusion of my new hobby and keep Gregory off my back. Every mile away from home was a breath of free air, even if I had to drive straight back into the stifling control of our house. I began the apartment hunt using my maiden name, Diana Miller. I created a disposable email account. No links to our past, no traceable history. Specifically for communicating with landlords and real estate agents in City B. The communication was painfully slow, but that was intentional. I refused to leave any GPS pings or a recognizable search history on the shared home computer. Every query had to be brief, generic, and immediately deleted. I felt like a spy in my own life, which, in a way, I was. I finally found a place. A small, simple studio apartment. It was perfect, discreet, already furnished with the bare essentials, and the landlord was open to a long-term lease paid entirely in advance, in cash. It was 6 months of pure, untraceable sanctuary. The moment I handed over that money to the landlord's assistant, a nervous, fleeting exchange in a coffee shop halfway between City A and City B, I felt a surge of triumph. It was the first time in decades I truly felt capable, independent, and effective at doing something entirely alone. Gregory had spent years dismantling my belief in my own competence, but this single act of planning and execution rebuilt it, brick by painful brick. When the envelope arrived a week later, my hands trembled so violently I almost dropped it. It was a simple, brown envelope, unmarked, delivered to a P.O. box I had rented under my false name. Inside, a single key. It wasn't just a piece of metal. It was the map to my freedom, the physical manifestation of my escape plan. Now came the hardest part, extracting myself. The biggest challenge wasn't the move itself, but what I had to take with me. Gregory kept all important documents, passports, birth certificates, the marriage license, in a locked drawer in his home office. Moving my identity and a few essential, irreplaceable items without Gregory noticing their absence felt like a challenge from a heist movie. I needed to move them from the heart of his control to the safety of my liberation box. I couldn't risk him discovering the missing items before the final, explosive moment of my departure. I received the key through the mail, a simple key in a plain brown envelope. It was the map of my escape. But now, the challenge was to move my essential identity documents and irreplaceable items without Gregory noticing the lack of something vital. I had secured the key, but I still needed the papers that proved I was Diana, and not just Gregory's wife. The locked drawer in his study felt miles away. This chapter is hard to talk about because it forces me to confront the real cost of my marriage. Gregory never physically hurt me, but I confess that the years of psychological abuse were the true, devastating violence. The way he systematically destroyed my self-worth, making me feel humiliated and incapable because I was financially dependent on him, was deliberate cruelty. I describe how the very act of planning the clandestine movements, the research, the silent budgeting, it all became my own private therapy. Each step was a tiny pinprick against the vast, suffocating balloon of his control. The liberation box was my sanctuary. It was an old shoebox, the kind nobody would ever bother to look inside, stashed beneath a stack of seasonal linens in the attic. I detail its contents with reverence, photocopies of every single vital document he kept locked away, acquired during quiet, dead-of-night trips to his office and slow, silent work with a hand scanner. My college diploma, the one he constantly mocked, claiming it was useless, was folded inside. And, most importantly, the proof of the brooch's sale, my financial declaration of independence. It was more than a hiding place. It was the physical proof that I was worthy of a future. I talk about the profound sense of overcoming that washed over me the moment I tucked the apartment key inside that box. That key represented the shattered remains of my cage. It wasn't just a new place. It was my first truly owned property, my absolute refuge, secured by my own efforts. I spent many evenings staring at that key, feeling the fear slowly drain away, replaced by a quiet, fierce resolve. I wasn't the weak, helpless woman Gregory had spent 30 years manufacturing. The final arrangements were made with the lawyer, Harper, in City B. A secret, prepaid consultation, setting up the basic legal framework for the divorce, contingent upon my safe arrival. Harper knew the situation was delicate, knowing Gregory's nature. She was ready. On that night, the night before my scheduled departure, I had to be flawless. I forced myself to pretend to have a terrible headache, pleading with Gregory to leave me alone so I could rest. I needed him to be out of my way, not noticing the faint tremor in my hands or the unnatural brightness in my eyes. I lay there in the dark, next to the man I was leaving forever, but I did not sleep. The date was marked on an internal calendar in my soul. Tomorrow would be the absolute last dawn I woke up as Gregory's wife. I had to fake a splitting headache that night to avoid interacting with Gregory. I lay down, but sleep was impossible. The date was set. Tomorrow would be my final morning as Gregory's wife. I listened to his heavy, rhythmic breathing beside me, and the tension was so thick I could almost taste it. I knew I couldn't fail. The tension was suffocating. I narrate Gregory's oppressive routine one last time, observing it with the clinical detachment of a scientist. The exact hour he arrived home, the way he expected dinner on the dot, the precise level of superficial concern I had to project. I had to ensure the routine remained so utterly normal that the sheer abnormality of my disappearance would take time to register in his thick skull. I didn't want him to panic. I wanted him to be confused, then furious, and finally, terrified of the loss of control. I recall watching Gregory read the newspaper that evening, his posture radiating ownership, entitlement, and boredom. His silence, which I once feared, now filled me with a cold resolve. Every minute I spent performing for him was another minute closer to my freedom. The final act of packing was a silent, intense game of espionage. I could only take the absolute essentials, the things that could vanish without him ever looking for them. They had to fit into one small, unassuming backpack, which I mentally dubbed my small travel case. I detail the precious contents. The few surviving photos of my daughter, Emily, whom Gregory had successfully alienated from me over the years, the indispensable liberation box, and a few pieces of clothing I genuinely loved. The backpack itself was hidden under the spare tire cover in the trunk of our car, ready for the car maintenance, excuse I had prepared for the next morning. I remember thinking, as I folded the clothes, that I wasn't just packing to leave. I was packing to become Diana again. Gregory came into the room later that night. He didn't come to kiss me or show affection. He gave me a patronizing tap on the shoulder and delivered his final command. "Don't be late making my coffee tomorrow, Diana." His tone was dismissive, expecting instant obedience. The weight of his power hung heavy in the air. I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was the very last order he would ever issue that I would choose to obey. I looked up at him as he turned away, his back massive and unaware. And for that single fleeting moment, I felt not fear, but profound pity for the small, pathetic man who was about to discover that it was he who genuinely had nothing. He had controlled the house, the money, the narrative, but he hadn't controlled me. Gregory wished me good night with a dismissive tap on the shoulder and an order. "Don't be late making my coffee tomorrow." I knew that was the last command he would ever give that I would follow. I stared at his retreating back, and for a moment, I felt pity for the man who was about to realize that he was the one about to lose everything. I whispered a silent promise to myself. That coffee would never be made. The day of liberation dawned, gray and overcast, but inside me, the sun was rising. I woke before the alarm, my body humming with a nervous, electric energy. I performed the ultimate act of obedience. I made his coffee, leaving the fragrant, steaming mug precisely where he liked it. It was a final, theatrical gesture of servitude before I ripped off the mask. Gregory, predictably, walked out the door, grumbling about the morning traffic and completely oblivious to the fact that his entire world was about to collapse. The silence that descended upon the house after the door closed wasn't the usual stifling quiet. It was deafening with opportunity. I moved with a speed and efficiency I didn't know I possessed. I grabbed the backpack, threw on a neutral jacket, and walked out of that house without looking back. The first step of the getaway plan went off perfectly. I drove to the local mall, which I told Gregory was the auto shop for the car's maintenance. In the furthest corner of the parking garage, I met Monica. Monica, an old friend I hadn't seen in years, knew just enough of the truth to agree to help. I had paid her a substantial sum, from the Sapphire Brooch funds, to take the car and hide it in a distant city, holding onto the keys indefinitely. I hugged her, tears finally pricking my eyes, and muttered a simple, "Thank you for everything." Then I was on the bus. Describing the bus ride is impossible without talking about the pure, raw feeling of it. Every single kilometer we covered, physically separating me from City A and Gregory, was a mile of emotional distance. I watched the view change, the familiar landmarks shrinking, the landscape becoming new and unknown. The tight, painful knot of fear and years of shame in my chest began to loosen, replaced by a deep, powerful current of hope. I was watching my old life literally disappear in the rearview mirror. When the bus finally pulled into the station in City B, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced since I was a teenager. The city sign felt like a welcome banner with the name of my new life written on it. I took a cab directly to the building. When I stepped inside the small studio apartment, I didn't unpack or clean. I just collapsed onto the mattress. The first, most crucial act of permanent erasure was next. I took my old burner-use cell phone, and with a heavy rock I'd found in the building's garden, I smashed it into pieces, removing the chip and grinding it under my heel. I was gone. I arrived in City B. The sign for the city felt like the name of my freedom. Once I was inside the small apartment building, I tossed myself onto the mattress. The very first thing I did was take my old phone, remove the chip, and break both. I was finally completely and utterly disappeared. The studio apartment was simple, functional, and smelled faintly of fresh paint. It was empty, yet it was the most peaceful place I had ever known. This chapter is a meditation on simplicity and ownership. I describe the profound, almost religious ritual of buying a basic kettle and a single bag of quality coffee. The act of brewing that first cup by me for me in my very own temporary kitchen was a statement of possession and dignity. It tasted like victory. I talk about the crucial difference between the loneliness of 30 years of marriage and the simple, quiet solitude of that studio. In Gregory's house, I was alone, but never solitary. I was always performing, always accountable. Here, I was solitary, but never truly alone, because I had myself back. My greatest priority now was ensuring Gregory could never, ever trace me. I bought a cheap, second-hand prepaid cell phone with a completely new number, a phone I would only use for emergency contact with Harper, my lawyer. The old me, the old number, all discarded forever. I was Diana, with a new address, a new number, and a new life plan. But the tension was still there, a thin wire stretched taut in my gut. How long would it take Gregory to realize this wasn't just a temper tantrum, but a serious, planned departure? My focus shifted from running to establishing. I started a budget, planning out every dollar of Evelyn's broche money. It was frightening but exhilarating. I was the CFO of my own existence. One evening, seeking distraction, I turned on the small cable TV in the apartment. A local news report immediately flashed on the screen, detailing a rise in domestic violence cases in the wider region. The sight of the statistics, the grim faces, made me snatch the remote and turn the set off instantly. I refused to be a statistic. I had engineered this escape not just to be a survivor, but to be a superpower, a testament to overcoming the odds. The next and final necessary step was to transform my flight into an undeniable legal victory. I couldn't just disappear. I had to fight him from the shadows. I turned on the cable TV in the apartment. A news report about the increase in domestic violence in the region made me quickly turn the set off. I didn't want to be a statistic, but a survivor. I knew what I had to do next: transform my escape into an absolute legal triumph, making sure Gregory couldn't simply wipe me from the books. I confess that I spent those first few days indulging in the sweet, cold fantasy of Gregory's reaction, deducing his every infuriated move. First, there would be irritation. Where is she? The maintenance can't take this long. Then the cold, simmering rage. He would call my old cell phone and get the voicemail, an unexpected obstacle that would turn his fury to panic. I could almost hear his frustrated roar. He would, eventually, try the auto shop and find no record of the car. That would be the first crack in his certainty. Then the discovery of the missing cash. He'd finally go to the kitchen, perhaps to cook or to demand I bake something, and notice the slight difference in the flour tin, the change in weight, the unusual seal. Then the final realization. The sapphire brooch, the heirloom he didn't even acknowledge, was missing. It was the moment he realized he was dealing with a calculating, intelligent opponent, not a dependent wife. The moment of climax, I imagine, must have been pure theater. Gregory confronting the absolute, terrifying emptiness of the house. I picture him in our bedroom, screaming my name, Diana, Diana, and only the echo of his own voice answering him. His fear wasn't about me. It was about the profound loss of control. The absolute certainty he had that I would return, begging, shattered into dust. The chapter ends with Gregory, utterly ashamed and utterly furious, doing the only thing his controlling nature knew how to do. He called the police, reporting me as a missing person. He wasn't seeking my welfare. He was attempting to bring his property back under his dominion. That night, in my little studio, my new burner phone buzzed with an email notification, forwarded from my disposable account. It was from Harper, the formidable lawyer I had contacted before leaving. The message was concise and electric. Diana, the police from City A have contacted us. Gregory has opened a missing person report. The plan is officially in motion. Do not move. That same night, in my safe haven, I received a notification in the new email account from the lawyer I had contacted before my flight. The message was brief. Diana, City police have contacted us. Gregory opened a report. The plan is in motion. Do not move. I knew that report was my ultimate weapon. Gregory's missing person report, intended as a leash, was, in fact, my legal passport. I detail the palpable tension of my first in-person meeting with Harper, my lawyer, in her City B office. Stepping into that calm, professional space felt like walking into a protective shield. Harper, a woman radiating competence and strength, made me feel validated and secure. I placed the liberation box on her desk. She was genuinely impressed by the depth of documentation I had covertly collected over the months. Harper laid out the strategy. We would use Gregory's report as the official trigger to formalize my own counterclaim of financial and emotional abuse. My flight would be legally transformed into a departure under duress, proving that I left to save my life and security, not to abandon the marriage. I would use his panic as proof of his controlling nature. The focus of this part of my confession is the powerful transition from being fueled by fear to being fueled by legal certainty. Gregory wanted me back because of his dependency on control. I would attack him with the evidence of his abuse. We meticulously reviewed the evidence. The receipts showing Gregory deliberately denying me access to joint funds, the correspondence where he explicitly called me a dependent, and the documents proving I had to sell my inheritance, Evelyn's brooch, just to secure basic safety. Harper's meticulousness was a comfort. I was no longer a lone fugitive. I was a client with a powerful ally. The decision was made. It was time to pull the trigger. The chapter culminates in the exact moment Harper pressed the send button on the formal email. It was the official denunciation of abuse against Gregory, coupled with the request for a preliminary restraining order and the freezing of marital assets. Harper turned from her screen to face me, her expression firm. "Now, Diana," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "There is no turning back. Soon, he will know you aren't missing. You are fighting." The impact of the denunciation was instant and catastrophic for Gregory. I narrate how Harper kept me informed of the resulting chaos. Gregory received the notification via a court official, a total humiliation delivered right to his office. He was, Harper reported, in an absolute state of panic. His assets were provisionally frozen, and he was served with a temporary restraining order, forbidding him from approaching me, even though he still didn't know my location. I recount the satisfying mental image of Gregory, the ultimate controller, being completely controlled and paralyzed by a simple piece of paper signed by a judge. I reflect on how his voice, which had kept me humiliated and silenced for so long, finally lost all its power. I had not just broken his rules, I had weaponized the legal system against him. The punishment was coming from the one place he least expected, legitimate authority. I was no longer running for my life. I was ensuring my rightful share of the marital assets. Gregory frantically tried to contact me through third parties, distant relatives, old acquaintances, but I ignored every single attempt. My silence was my most potent weapon, demonstrating my resolve and independence. The most profound realization was that his anger no longer scared me. It invigorated me. His chaos was my calm. I was watching the monster I had lived with for decades finally crumble under the weight of his own misdeeds. Harper called me again, her voice crackling with excitement. "Diana, we did it. The judge has approved the full restraining order. The case has gained atypical visibility. It's hitting the regional news cycle. Prepare yourself, Diana. Your face will be everywhere tomorrow. It's time for you to tell your story." The moment was here. I wasn't just safe. I was about to go public. This is the conclusion. I'm sitting here now on my small, comfortable sofa in the City B studio, watching the news. The local broadcast airs the feature. My face, my real face, not the timid, controlled mask Gregory demanded, is on the screen, next to a detailed report about Gregory, now formally indicted for financial and emotional abuse, and the finalized restraining order. The reporter speaks about my courage, my meticulous planning, and the shocking nature of my denunciation. The victory is not just legal, the guaranteed interim alimony and the fair division of assets, but deeply personally moral. I confess what I did with the money Gregory promised I would never have. I paid the rent, bought the absolute basics, and used the majority to invest in my future. I enrolled in an online course I always wanted to take. This chapter doesn't focus on wealth, but on dignity. I am building a foundation, not a mansion. I finalized this confession by revealing that I bought a small, high-quality camera, the very one I'm using to record this video right now. I look directly into the lens and speak to you, the viewer, but mostly in my mind to Gregory. The conclusion is absolute. He was wrong. At 52, I had everything without him: a safe home, a powerful voice, and an unburdened future. I closed the video with the final line, polemic and profoundly satisfying, designed to provoke conversation and debate. Gregory will pay for the damages, and my case has set a precedent. I am not a victim. I am the proof that the most closely guarded secret of an abuser is the immense power he hands to his victim when she finally, meticulously walks away. Resolution. Diana is safe and secure in her new home. The divorce proceedings are advancing favorably with a guaranteed fair settlement, and Gregory is facing the severe legal and public consequences of his systematic abusive behavior. The story is complete, and the protagonist has achieved not just freedom, but genuine peace and vindication.